Welcome, welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. That's what we get to do here every single week. We get to craft this life that is the most beautiful thing we can imagine. That's what we're about here, That is the purpose. Sometimes people think, oh, what is my purpose in life? Well, I can just tell you because it's the same for all of us. And what it is that we're to be our very best selves. Whatever that looks like and on whatever journey that takes you on, your purpose is to be your best self. And you might find different pathways and everyone's journey is different. You might find your vision of where you're going to end up being different than mine. The way you travel that. But the purpose is to be your very best self, nothing more, nothing less. We're not looking for perfectionism, but we're looking for your very best, for excellence. And that's what I want to bring to you every single day that I come on the show. And that's why I have a guest today for you, something in a different arena than we've usually talked about. And I have Laurie Barkman with me today. Laurie, welcome, welcome.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for having me on. This is really fun.
Oh, yeah, I'm just delighted. You're one of those that came across my email and said, is Laurie a good fit for your show? And at first I thought, well, you're kind of business oriented. And even though we do talk a lot about business here, because I was a businesswoman for 35 years, we don't talk necessarily about just business. But then as I read more about what you're doing, and of course you've written a book called Business Transition Handbook, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. It perked my interest because I think, as I told you, I went through a business transition and many different phases in my life with that. So let's start with women in the workplace and men. So it's not just women. You deal with both men and women, and how you see those transitions happening for women and men, and how we walk through them and how we deal with one. What are some of the most common?
Isn't it amazing that we have so many identities in our life?
Yeah.
How we see ourselves. We are a mother. We are a wife. We are a sister. We're a friend. We're a colleague. We're a boss. However we identify tends to anchor us. And when those things change, when our tectonic plates underneath us start to shift, it can feel very uncomfortable, especially if you're not in charge of those decisions. Let's take the scenario of someone losing their job. That rug being pulled out from underneath them. Imagine that you've been through that. I've been through that. I don't know if you've been through that, Mary. And maybe some people in your audience have been through that. And we can understand that there's an emotional loss that we feel when we are removed from something we enjoy and that we feel like we're pretty good at. And I've been through that a number of times in my career, as when the decision to leave an entity was not my own. And I think that does happen. And it happens to really talented people. Look at what's happening in the tech industry. There's a lot of layoffs right now. There's also a lot of demand for labor. We have a shrinking labor force in the United States based on our demographics.
Right.
And there is a need for talent. And there's a pretty low unemployment rate right now across the United States. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we all have strengths that we can play to. How do we match that up with what we feel lights us up, lifts us up? Yeah. We might be really good at something, but hate doing it. Or we might want to do it. We're not that good at it yet. And so we're not seen as an expert in that yet. And we can't really do more of it until we're enabled to. Or maybe you just totally stink at something and you shouldn't do it at all. There's kind of those four quadrants. And for me in my career, I've tried to make strides in that. What's my highest and best use? What am I really good at? And I enjoy it. I've done things that I am really good at that I don't enjoy. And I've tried to steer away from those things that bring me down. That concept of the mood elevator. Yeah. I want my mood elevator to be up, not down. And I think a lot of people, as they go through these transitions in career, their mood of elevator is going up and down, their identity is changing. Yeah. And I think the more we feel in control of those decisions, just naturally as people, we're going to be happier about those transitions in our lives.
I've often wondered, like with myself, did it become my passion to be in food and events and an architect of those kind of things because I was good at it? Or did I become good at it because it was my passion? I mean, which led first, the passion or the gift? I mean, I'm not quite sure which that is. Which do you think leads that? Do you think you're first passionate and then you become good? Or do you think you're good first and then you become passionate?
I don't know that there's one answer, Mary. I think it's a nature versus nurture question. And I ask
Yeah.
it a lot on my podcast. I talk with entrepreneurs all the time. And I ask them if they think there's an entrepreneurial gene. A lot of people say, oh, my parents were this or my parents were that. They had a business or they did that and they were pretty entrepreneurial. And it's funny when people meet me and they're like, oh, were your parents entrepreneurial? And I was like, no, not at all. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a blend. We all can develop patterns and behaviors and learned behaviors by watching others that we admire. And now with things like YouTube, I mean, you can study anything you want. And so you can learn a lot. You can learn and you can get into something, or you innately have that skill. I think that one skill, if I can talk about salespeople, I think there are born salespeople. I mean, you just see it, right? The charisma, the
Right.
go for itness, the willing to hear no and not let it get to you. You know, those traits. Can you learn sales?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Are there effective salespeople who are more introverted or, you know, whatever characteristics you want to give to the stereotype? Yeah, absolutely. You'll find them out there. But I do think there are certain innate traits that we all have that lend us to our brains being more creative or more analytical. And then with food service and your story, you know, I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. You know, maybe there was something that inspired you when you were in the early days of all of this, and you said, you know, I just want to do more of that. For some, it's very practical, like, oh, I think I can make money doing this, and I need to make money, and I'm therefore going to do that. And some people just fall into it. And others have a very purposeful, intention-filled track of why they want to go do what they want to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure which came first for me. That's why I keep asking the question because I wanted the family that I grew up in, where my dad was definitely an entrepreneur and he was the breadwinner. My mom stayed home. Went to college because I wanted to, further my education. But I absolutely thought that I would be stay-at-home mom and taken care of and all those kinds of things. And I didn't think about, I graduated originally in social work and so far from business. And I felt like for the longest time I got pulled kicking and screaming down this road of entrepreneurship. I didn't want to do it. I want to be a stay-at-home mom. But that wasn't my situation. My husband was not able to work. What do I do? And so, I have children. So do I put them all in daycare? He couldn't care for them. No. What can I do where I can have my children with me? What started as, of course, as a very small, I'll just make cookies and breads, grew into this largest hospitality company in the state of Utah. And I loved every moment of it once I stepped into it. So what I thought was like, I don't want to do this, ended up being one of the greatest passions of my life, to create this empire of people working with me and my teaching them and serving people. I always say I had the best career in the world. I got to go to a party every day and and give people their lifelong dreams. I loved that part of it. But I think that you are so right. Sometimes mother is the necessity, or how's that phrase go? Necessity is the mother of invention. And so what you feel you're drawn to sometimes is also what you're compelled to. I didn't want to be on welfare. I didn't want to be just a, low income family making it from paycheck to paycheck. I wanted something different for my family. And being raised in the 50s after the World War II, of course, I was taught that. I was taught that every day of my life. Right. You didn't have the option I didn't grow up in the 60s. I would be different if I had grown up in the 60s, but I was born in the 50s, and that's created a different stamp on me. Do you feel like there are different generations and that each generation responds differently to this finding a career, stepping into the workplace. Because I see that now with my children, with my grandchildren.
Yeah, I do think so. My mother was a working mom also. She was a teacher. She was in social work. My early years, I think up till kindergarten, she worked. She didn't work, but then she worked full time thereafter. So for me, I always saw, my mother working, my father working, and I think for the way I grew up and the way I was in my brain, I'm very independent. For whatever reason, I just grew up very independent, wanted to do my thing, and was wired to be very career oriented. I was in high school student government leader, and I was, volunteering for everything possible. And in college, went on to go into a business role, where eventually I said, I want to be a CEO one day, and I did. I achieved that in my young 40s. But it's funny. I talk about meeting my husband at 18. We met freshman year in college, and I laugh in the way that we've made this work, because it makes me happy, to say we've kind of had this career checkerboard where I'm taking a leap and then he's taking a leap and then I'm taking a leap and then he's taking a leap, and it's worked out for us. But both of us have worked the whole time in our careers, and we've raised two children we're basically empty nesters now. One is out of college and one is a sophomore. And I'm just so proud of that. And I like to say, this is kind of the cheeky part, that he knew what he was getting into. I mean, he met me when I was 18. I was wired to have a career, and I was wired to, I'm a striver. I always just challenge myself. No one's going to challenge me more than me. And that's just how I am. And he's that way too. And it's worked for us, because we've respected each of our careers, and we've each made changes in our 25 plus years. We're each going to make changes, but we've done it in a way that is supportive of each other. We've both been CEOs, and not at the same time, which would have been really tricky. And I think that that's a really important part of it. And I don't know that that's generational, but for me and how I grew up, gender was never, ever, ever anything. I could do whatever I wanted, and I was going to go do it. And my parents were like, okay, go do that. You go do that. And same with my husband. We didn't have any gender, quote unquote, roles. He grew up in a country where household roles were very democratized, a country of Sweden, right? And we think about how men and women do a lot of things to care for their children together. So we've just made it work. It's never easy. We had our ups and downs. And I look back in the early days when the kids were little, and I think, oh my God, I made so many mistakes. I would have done it differently now. But hey, we are where we are, and we can't beat ourselves up for it. But I think in the big picture, and I don't want to generalize in my generation and say everybody thinks like me. I think the reality is they don't. I have friends that got wonderful undergraduate degrees, and I think you could say they got an MRS degree. And they're in my generation. You said you were born in the 50s. I was born in the 70s, and I'm a Gen Xer. And there are definitely Gen Xers who had chosen to not work and now are in their 50s, and I'm seeing them come back to the workforce. In some cases, they're coming back into their husband's company or their family business. In others, it's real estate is a great entry point. I have friends in their late 50s taking the real estate license and starting a brand new career in real estate. And that's an amazing thing. I'm so proud of them to do that. Each of them have their reasons for why they're doing it. And that varies, but there are, I think that's the thing about Gen Xers is you'll find everything. We're the tweeners, right? We're tween the baby boomers and, the millennials. And, I think there's courage in every generation to do something that you want to do and pursue. I think with the millennials, and now I see with my kids and Gen Z, every generation handles things differently. They learn differently. They have different resources and tools. Obviously, with the digital, amazing digital economy that we have and digital environment that we have, these kids are growing up with things we didn't have. I still have my typewriter from college, by the way, sitting right over there. And some of these, some of the way we approach things are going to stay the same, and many things are going to change. But I think the reality is we're all individuals. Everyone's family situation is different. I think for me and my family and my kids, they've seen me work. They've seen me become an entrepreneur, later in my life. And they're proud of me for whatever I choose to do. And that's what I want for them.
That individual choice is so critical for your own well-being, your own peace in your own soul, not to do what you feel society is calling you to do, whether that's to be in the workplace or to not be in the workplace, whether to be a top achiever or whether to be just there loving the social part of working. We can't rely on what other people tell us in order to find that space of a meaningful life. You just have to find what's right for you and not be influenced by others as much. But, I think you really something interesting to me, because I see that when you talked about people who have been out of the workplace and then want to step back into the workplace. So many women step out to have children, and then empty nesters, they want to step back in, or they step out when their children are young, but once they're in school, then they step back in. Maybe they stop their education because they got married, they figure they don't need it. But what we have seen statistically in all the universities that I've been on their boards is that, 80% of those women are going to be working. And now the statistic is even higher. It's closer to 85% of the women are going to be working, some because of economic situations, but to be honest with you, most because they are called to it. They feel like, I want to do this piece. And so if you stepped out for a period of time, Laurie, how do you see, what's the transition to finding your way back and being a viable contributor to the workforce?
I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. And I mentioned it earlier. I think if we take stock of what is it that we are good at, and we have superpowers, each of us, can we articulate what those are? Do we think we know what those are? And then can we articulate what we enjoy doing? So as an example, for me, one of my superpowers is helping people with their resume. I don't know why. It just is. I've always been really good at it.
Okay.
Yes. But I don't really enjoy it. And it's not something I want to do as a career. So I'm not going to put that out there as that, hey, this is what I do. I don't. I do it for family. I do it for friends. I help them. And I have helped people throughout, the last 30 years, helping people with their resumes as a favor. And I can point to numerous situations where I've helped people make a career pivot or get back into the workforce, get their first job, that kind of thing, or elevate and excel and get a promotion. But I use that as an example. I'm really good at it, but it's not what I want to do, right? There have been situations with friends where they needed some help just talking through those two criteria. What am I good at? What do I enjoy? For one person, it led them to switch from a career in education. I think she was teaching, and she wanted to get into software. And the pivot for her was really interesting. We ended up helping her think of a springboard. So what are the things in your resume or your career background or exposure that you've had in your family life? And I think for women that have not been in the workforce, let's appreciate that you've learned a lot along the way and you've seen a lot of things, and maybe you've volunteered.
You have managed a household budget.
Skills. Yeah. So let's take an inventory of the skills you've developed. Project management, fundraising, team management, and the list goes on and on. So let's not undermine or speak badly to ourselves that of what we've done. Just because you haven't been paid for it doesn't mean it's not valuable. So let's take an inventory of the skills and the experiences you've had, quote unquote, even if, right? I don't like to use it that way, but that's true. Even if we have a gap in our resume. The other way to think about it is write your resume with all of your years of experience, just for fun. That includes working in the home, working outside the home, volunteering, family things. I'll just use this as an example. What if you've been doing a lot of elder care for your family and you understand a lot about family law and estate maybe you have an interest in becoming a paralegal.
Right.
It might lead you down a track, and your personal experience with some of these things, it can be valued. And also, Mary, I said it earlier in the discussion, in the U.S., we have a real labor challenge in that certain pockets of the U.S. and certain functions or geographies, we have a labor shortage. We need talent. And the proliferation of tools like Zoom and Riverside, we're recording on these wonderful platforms. We don't need to be together. I'm in Pennsylvania, you're in Utah.
Right.
Same for jobs. To find remote work, to find work that appreciates all of you. I hear that a lot, that companies want to understand the whole person and meet them where they are in a lot of ways. We didn't have that when we were coming up through the corporate ranks. So I'm envious of the people now that can start into different careers or make different choices, because the work environment is much, much more flexible than where we had it 20, 30 years ago. So yeah, I think women particularly, there's also been studies on this, Mary. I don't know if you've seen them, where if there's a job description and women read it and they're like, oh, I don't match that. Well, it's been quantified that if a man reads that job description, if he's at least 50% qualified, he will apply. And women, they need to feel like they're 75 to 80% qualified in order to apply. So if we just acknowledge that and say, wait a minute, why is that? Why is that? That doesn't need to be, and think differently about it. It's probably at its core about our mindset about ourselves and feeling good and proud about what we've accomplished. And it doesn't have to be that you've had an employer to feel that way.
I love that. That is such great advice to those women who are either at a younger age looking, or even at the 50s, 60s, hopefully they're not looking again. But, I retired at 65, and I wasn't ready to play golf every day and eat bonbons. That just was not what I wanted to do. And so I started a new company, even at age 65, Mary Crafts Inc., and all the things that now involves a whole different genre from where I was before. That's been difficult to pick up that genre of being the Martha Stewart of Utah to, here, Mary is the wisdom tank of Utah. That's been, a pull, but I've loved it. I've loved the shift. I've loved the energy that it's taken to reform who I am now and use these years of wisdom to form that and move that forward. I love that. You have written this book, Business Transition Handbook, and I know one of your huge skill sets is helping people as they get ready to do their business transition. I really want to talk about that for a minute, because for me, that was one of the biggest and greatest pieces of advice that I received as I began thinking about what this transition was going to look like. And I really began thinking about it seriously at somewhere around age 56, 57. I had built this company, and what happens next? And I began to really put it out to people and ask, okay, what should I do? Every kind of corporate, you belong to these different corporate organizations, Vistage and different things. I'd put it out. So how am I going to make this transition? And you get all this advice. And the best piece of advice that I got was to hire someone that knows what they're doing. Someone who's walked this road before, that it's not their first rodeo, and actually use their advice and bring them in as a consultant and how that would work. And I thought about what that would cost versus what I would gain. And to gain, first of all, someone who could consult with me, to gain someone who knew all the different avenues and could suggest different things, and was the best piece of advice I've received. And
That's fantastic.
At age 59, I
that.
began to then look for this person. I found this person. I talked to a lot of different people about who they would recommend. And within a year then, we had everything in place. And my two oldest sons then decided that's what they wanted, and they walked into that. We walked into the agreement of from age 60 to 65, what would happen during that time frame. And when I walked out, I just had no qualms. But that's because I hired someone. So tell me what you do and what your book is about.
I love your story, Mary, because so many people do not have your story. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
100% of business owners are going to leave their company one day. But the reality is that very, very few are prepared. You had the foresight, and you had you made the time, and you dedicated the resources to planning. And that's exactly why I wrote the book. That's why I have my podcast. That's why I'm trying to educate entrepreneurs about the benefits of thinking ahead. And the other thing that I want to double click on is how you talked about the personal identity, and that personal transition was so important. And what I find is that the can is so kicked, right? People just say, oh, I know I need to think about that, but I'd rather work on this transactional thing. And it's kind of the transaction, or thinking about that sale and working with legal advisors and people like me on the mergers and acquisition side. It becomes the practical, numbers-oriented, transactional thing. And we can get our arms around that. And then we kick the can on the personal, emotional things. And too many times, I'll just take it a step back. People have no plan, okay? If it's in your head, it is not a plan.
Yeah.
Okay? If it's not written down and it is not communicated, it is not a plan. If you have something that is written down and communicated, you are 40% more likely to achieve your goals. Boom.
Absolutely.
Let's do that. Let's recognize we need a plan. You recognize that. I love that. So most people don't have a plan, and they don't communicate it. And I agree with you, having people on your side who've been through the process. They will say this, and I say it all the time. You can't do exit planning when you're exiting. It is too late.
Yeah.
So why not do things that help you prepare? When very first things we talked about in this episode was about feeling of control. We want to be in control. And when things change underneath us and it changes our identity, how do we feel about that?
Yeah. We don't always feel in control. Yeah.
That's right. And so
it brings in all that fear of the unknown.
That's right.
I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. And it's scary. And therefore, we don't want to work on it. We don't want to do it. In the book and in the course that I'm developing called Endgame Entrepreneurship, it's absolutely why I put the early chapters and the early learning modules about a transition mindset and about personal readiness and about thinking, considering your identity today and what is important to you to shift in your mindset from here to there, right? And that's why I talk about transition, and I am the Business Transition Sherpa. I use that moniker for a reason. This is a journey. This is not a point in time. And the other thing you said about the time frame, I also appreciate it. Don't give yourself a day to do this. You said you took you a year and you got things in place. Yeah. Hallelujah. Yes, it takes a while, because some of these decisions are really, really big. And you want to get legal advice, and you want to get tax advice, and you want to do things with considering all the pieces and parts. It takes time. And here's another secret. The transition planning is going to help you run a better business today, and you're building value for tomorrow. Yeah. And so it's an investment in yourself. It's an investment in your business, and it creates a runway of options. I like to say, let's create exit options. We have option A, we have option B, option C. You don't know right now which one will actually transpire for you. It was an inside transfer, a selling to your related parties, which are your family. There are other types of exits. We could put many on the table. But we don't know. So let's create options, and let's prioritize, and let's work towards that. And let's create an exit timeline we can work backwards. That's the thesis of the book. Let's give ourselves a runway. Let's think about the end game so that we can work backward to today. What can we do while time is on our side? How do we avoid succession pitfalls? How do we create valuable exit options?
I love that. And there are so many people who, at least women that I know, that started businesses and companies in their 20s, and they ran them through their 30s. And now they're like, even in their 40s, they're doing things younger than I did. I would do the classic 65, but they're like at 40. Like, in fact, I was in a small group just this week with women, and we talked about this very thing. And she was like in her 40s, and she said, "I'm thinking about selling most and getting out." And we talked about that, and I was just dumbfounded because I would never have thought about getting out at age 40, but a lot of women are. And how do they do that? And how do they, there's so many different roads that you can take with that. The service that you offer and this book is going to be a godsend for every single woman owner that's here listening to this. You should absolutely make sure you do this. Is your book available on Amazon?
Yes, the Business Transition Handbook is on Amazon.
Okay.
And they can grab a copy there. It would be so exciting to me if 1 million entrepreneurs, I could reach 1 million people. I just think about the potential impact, not only for themselves, but for this intergenerational wealth that can be created around the world. And yes, it's a U.S., focused book, and that I talk about U.S. dollars and things of that nature. But all the concepts in this book can impact anybody, no matter where you live.
I love that. Thank you, Laurie, for this great thought into planning ahead. I think you cannot craft a meaningful life without planning ahead. You don't just stumble into a great life. You look for it, you plan for it, you set goals, you work on it, and then you create it along the way. I hope that all of my listeners who are in business, who have their own company, who even thinking about that, the next step would take advantage of buying this book. We're going to include at the end of this podcast, you can have all the links to Laurie's podcast, to the link to buy Laurie's book on Amazon, as well as her website. So you're not going to lose track of her. We have all those things for you. And Laurie, thank you so much for being with us today. And I can't wait to be on your podcast about succession stories. So we're going to have some great connections in the future. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mary. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye now. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.